welcome to the NEWSPASTE Podcast with me, Johnny Vedmore. I'm here with someone special today. I'm always here with someone special. That's what I say every week, but I mean it every week. I try and have special people on, but this is someone I've been meaning to have on for a long time, and we've had discussions about it here and there where we've been like, yes, 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 yes. And finally, the stars aligned, and it's really interesting. Everybody's going to find this really interesting. It really makes sense as well that this follows from Al Borealis and then Tony Goslin podcast, because that's very much about hidden histories, but that's very like immediate post-war hidden histories. And no, my guest today does cover a hell of a lot about that. We're entering into a certain period that leads further along, goes further than that, but still is basically it fundamentally in the same area. The consequences of the things that Tony Goslin has looked into is the things that Dana looks at. And yes, I'm with a lady who you can find as Dana Duda on Twitter, and Rotting Jewels on most platforms, on YouTube, on Instagram, on Rumble. So Rotting Jewels, which I like that. And so thank you for being on the NEWSPASTE Podcast and talking to me and the audience about all of what you're looking into, because some of it is right up my track, right up my street. Thank you for coming on, Dana.
Thank you so much for having me. Like you said, I've absolutely been looking forward to this, and I think the timing ended up being quite perfect for the way that my research ended up kind of diverting itself. But this was something that I wanted to cover at some point anyway, so better now than ever.
I'm a big believer in synchronicity. I believe that events happen and unfold in a way that seem to be aligned and in tune with other events that are going on. And sometimes people could say, oh, that's a plan. And sometimes people could say it's a coincidence, but you have enough of it going on and soon it becomes a road that you step,
Yes.
doesn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
And you've been stepping along a road that is... You've been stepping along it in a much different way, but it's very similar to a road that I started down. I think we're going to discover this because watching some of your videos, I get this sense that where I diverted off into another direction, you've actually walked a path that I was continuing to walk at a certain time. And I find it very interesting. You cover more than just one or two topics. I mean, you do as well something which I love, which is kind of what I call like, the data diving, like the news hound style of getting just into the information, opening up the documents and letting people see the documents for themselves. That's something that I truly love. So you're doing some really good work out there, obviously, and people, I think what people appreciate now is that these sort of things can come in bite-size format as well, because you do relatively small. I mean, you've got a few YouTube videos up, a couple, I think only like 13 or something, but on Instagram you've got many more, because I mean that's a platform that lends to that style of video. How long have you been doing the videos? What made you start doing it?
I've only been doing it since January. So isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that is mad, because what you're doing is high quality
Thank you.
investigation work. Well, all to learn to do before you like write everything down. In my work, before you write everything down, you just got to collect all of the information and you've got to go through it bit by bit. And what you're doing is going through it bit by bit. That's the bit that helps other people then make bigger journals or use that evidence, but also allows you to eventually continually make a bigger journal. I think that's what you're doing, because you cover certain topics in multiple videos, and that will always add up to be you've got a range on one subject or multiple subjects. So yeah, how long have you been so you've been doing it since January, but what sparked it?
So I did a couple crisis jobs during COVID. I'm an ICU nurse, and that really burned me out. And so, I just took a part-time job and I started reading a lot. And that book, The Brothers by Stephen Kinzer, about John Foster and Alan Dulles. It's like their
Ooh.
life biographies. So
Oh
I
my
read
God.
that and I thought, I had a pretty good grasp on history because my dad's from Germany. So he's kind of reinforced proper German history in my head. But once I read that book, I said, oh, well, I have to tell everyone about these things, but I have to source all of this to make sure that it's true. And it was a real moment of cognitive dissonance, like, oh, we don't go spreading democracy all over the world, like they love to say.
Hmm.
And then after that, I read Devil's Chessboard and then
Oh
the
yes.
Franklin Scandal. And that was the one that kind of took the wind out of my sails, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then I started the videos in January, and I wasn't planning on covering Franklin for a while. I wanted to cover all the coups under Alan Dulles while he was in the CIA, but then the United Nations came out with their statement for the advocacy for pedophilia. And I said, okay, well, I guess we're going to do Franklin now because it's time to
Yeah.
talk about it.
Time to get out the shotgun, everybody. I think the wolves are at the door. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And once I started that, because I like to supplement things, especially on Instagram, because it is such a visual platform, I went and hunted down old news clips and stuff just to try to give people some context. That way they could see it. But that was when everything kind of took off, and then people started asking me to come on and talk about it because then I talked about Dave McGowan's writings about the other abuse cases and the quote unquote satanic panic. Um, and then here I am now.
Yeah, here you are now, and I'm glad you're here. Satanic Panic is something that really intrigues me, and of course, it does for multiple reasons. Number one, I was a horror movie fan. Um,
Sure, me
uh,
too.
yeah, yeah. When I was, I don't tell this much out there. I don't think, but when I was very young, we got a VHS player for the first time. I used to go around my Nana Grampy's house. They had a top loading VHS, and every time I used to make them put on the Jackson Thriller video, and I'd hide behind a sofa. I just hide behind the sofa the entire time, just like look up every now and again. Oh my god, I couldn't handle it. It was just too scary. But the first videos we ever rented out as a family, we went down to the video shop, my mum, my dad, and my two older sisters, and we rented out Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and Critters. And we sat down. I can't remember
Classics.
how old I was. I must have been about 7 or 8 or something. And it was horrible. I mean, it's right at the start of Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Freddy Krueger comes out of the girl's stomach, or is that at the
Yep.
end? I can't remember. Well, anyway, it's pretty heavy for a kid, but I was just so into horror movies. So, I loved all of this dark, horrible stuff. But when you're growing up, you realize that other people get like a different idea of it, don't they? And I wanted I wanted to jump on then, and I need to slow down because there was someone I wanted to talk about, because we'll talk about someone called James Randi later as well, I'm sure. I'd like to anyway. So Franklin scandal. Can you explain to people who don't understand what the Franklin scandal is, what it is?
Sure. I'll try to keep it brief because obviously it's a loaded topic. But if you Google the Franklin scandal today, Wikipedia will tell you that it has been fact checked and that it is false, which is just completely atrocious, despite the author Nick Bryant reaching out to them politely many times. But it's neither here nor there. This is just how much these people want to cover up their crimes. So the Franklin scandal as a whole was a interstate pedophile network that went from coast to coast in the United States. There was Craig Spence, who was working out of Washington, D.C. I would say kind of the prequel to Epstein as far as a high level system with cameras and audio for blackmail within his home. And then there was Mr. Lawrence King, who was the rising star of the GOP. And he was out of Nebraska, Omaha, Nebraska. The only reason that really ultimately they got quote unquote busted was because, as always, lots of money was getting moved around and lots of stuff
Mhm.
was being bought, and it sent up red flags.
Yeah,
And
there was some sort of thing with a car as well, like a car getting pulled over with two guys in it. Is this a story from the Franklin scandal with a load of kids in it, dirty, unwashed kids? Go on.
that was
Anyway,
the Finders. That was the Finders
right,
cult.
okay, yeah. Okay, this is
It's
why
a
I.
it's a lot
You're
to
the
get
expert
mixed
on the
up.
Franklin scandal. Yeah. Go on.
Well, I mean, Nick Bryant's work, but I mean, I've read the book a couple of times just because I kind of use it as my Rosetta Stone because it was the first one. And he did such a good job. But uh, Lawrence King, he was working out of the Franklin Credit and Savings Credit Union in Omaha. And I think he ended up getting charged, it was roughly $39 million. And when they came in to investigate, social services said, hey, the cops won't listen here. We need to let you know that he is a pedophile and he's also a pimp. And that was where everything took off. He has not been charged to this day. I have verified
Didn't
that he is.
didn't he set up a chicken shop?
Hmm?
Did he set up I think he set up some sort of fried chicken place eventually, didn't he? I heard something along these lines.
He's working with children right now in a gifted kids program in
Seriously,
Washington, D.C.
What is wrong with these people?
I've
What is
reached out
wrong?
to them and they've ignored me.
So how do you think you okay? Because that's a point that I want to talk about. Of course, at some point is that the fact that I've come to the same place as you on multiple occasions where I've reached a point where a case that was from history has worked its way forward, and I'm now sitting in a place where I have to contact the police about something that's happening now, and they don't listen at all. I mean, completely blank you. And so how do you get around something like that? What can you do, or what do you think we can do collectively to pressurize police to do something about people like Lawrence King, Larry King?
Here's the issue with Lawrence King, in my opinion, as far as in the context of why he's so protected, is because at that time when that was going on, social services noted that the police wouldn't help. Why? Because the police were involved. This also involved Boys Town, which was the sort of orphanage in the area, which still operates to this day as well and has had countless scandals since then. Um, but I mean, these police were trafficking these kids as well, and there were allegations of satanic ritual abuse. And people love to just kind of chalk it up to this, hysteria. But when you listen to Nick Bryant read off the testimony of some of these kids, and obviously these are like fake names, right? Like, because some of them are underage and some of them are under psychiatric care. So it's to protect their privacy. But these kids state, I know that I was drugged. They told me that they were going to give me something that was going to make me sleepy. And then they talk about all this really insane satanic stuff. And it's like, even if they were drugged, kids are going to tell you what they saw. And all of these kids recall, and I'm saying kids very loosely, okay? This goes up to the legal age of kids, up to 17.
Mm-hmm.
It's all consistent. It's all the same. It's all very dark. But that's why all of this was able to flow, because Craig Spence and Lawrence King were working together. They were moving kids from DC all the way to the other coast, back and forth. There's some very bizarre Iran-Contra connections in all of this as well. So this was a heavy hitter, and honestly, I think that is why he can go and he can work in a gifted kids opera program in Washington, D.C. And on this company's website, they literally just sort of whitewash where he's from. And I'm like, no, because I recognize that face. And I want to make it very clear. I dug through the obituaries throughout the country to make sure that it was not the same Lawrence King. I wanted to make sure that I was not falsely accusing somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's him. It's him. And I reached out and I said, why are you guys being so vague in his biography about where he comes from and what kind of business he ran? Because for some reason, Nebraska is hailed as the heartland. I don't know why. I've never been there. And in his biography, it says Lawrence King hails from the heartland. And I'm like, well, that's kind of curious. So maybe I'll dig further. And they don't give anything specific about him. It's him because he sang at I think it was a Bush inauguration because Bush was his very good friend. And
Mm,
Larry King has some pipes on him. He's a fantastic opera singer. So it
mm.
makes sense to me. But the fact that they won't even acknowledge me, you know?
Yeah, so how do we sort that out? Because I'd say something about what I do with the NEWSPASTE Podcast is we have this conversation, but then unlike most podcast people, I want to be like, okay, how can I help in this? Because I hate like for when I was trying to get a pedophile out of a school, I didn't I contacted the police crime commissioner or whatever their name is, police commissioner. I contacted the police themselves. I contacted the FBI. I contacted the school. I contacted the school board, and no one did anything. I contacted the Parents Teachers Association, and they did stuff because I
Yeah.
contacted 4 or 5 random parents, and suddenly the teachers had the parents railing at them through the school. So there's always a way to find someone who's going to cause an issue and make a problem. And so what we got to do is work out how to do that. I think or at least that's my want. I want to do something really like I want to try and find ways to systemize responses to finding such information. As someone who is a pedophile is on a board that represents children, I want to try and find a system to get that stopped very quickly. And then maybe a way to look through organizations and actually check in children's organizations, because it's happening quite a lot. I think it was Claire Hazel in the Epstein case was also on the board of a children's charity. And when I've been doing the Pottinger pieces recently, I came across one of Pottinger's good friends, who's also friends with George H.W. Bush back then. A guy called Warren L. Dennis was outside counsel for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And during that, someone sent me, I was doing research on Hunter Biden and his involvement with Bowie Schiller Flexner, who represents some of the victims. And of course, he picked up an award from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children on behalf of his dead brother. Some
Oh,
of
I
this,
know.
and that's crazy. Yeah, that's just like, I mean, these people are also, how do we stop this happening? How can we, I mean, that's just crazy that these people are still allowed that sort of what is essentially access and protection. I suppose it's like a blanket. Do you think that's what it is? Do you think it's protection?
Well, I think it's an element of protection, absolutely, because I mean, I'm sure that Larry could sing on numerous people because not everyone's dead, right? But the other thing is that he was never charged. They only charged him with financial crimes. You know who they did charge? They charged the victims and threw them in jail. Alicia Owen was in prison in solitary confinement for 2 years because she wouldn't recant and because she wouldn't
Mhm.
change her story. So that's
Yeah.
how all of that worked out. Um, I think if more people understood, because, like you said, so looking back at these old cases and things that got dismissed or kind of swept under the rug, I'm also trying to make the argument over here that if we could figure out all of these and kind of blow the lid off of it, we could get to where it's going on right now. We could trace
Yes.
that
Okay.
line of corruption.
Okay, I like this because what this is something that I'm dealing with now is that I'm trying to, I go into a case and I try and find the place where the string attaches on both ends and then follow it and see which ways they go. And that this is how I was led to Pottinger. If someone is guilty at a time and going forward and just previously, then, well, as it says that if you follow all the way back, you'll find a long list of things they're guilty for, but then you'll find things that they didn't look like was dodgy at the time, events that they were involved in, that you, on closer examination, you realize, oh, this was actually something dirty happening in the distance. That's why they had their best men on it. It uncovers completely new stuff, that sort of thinking, of how to find someone who's dirty. So, like, I mean, this is, for me, this is really interesting because I'm British. Yeah. So my experience of going into doing what starting off to do what you do, I do it in a different way, but looking at type of subjects you do, I was doing it in Britain. So even now, I'm not sure, like I say, I can never remember all the American things that have happened, but I have a
Sure.
basic knowledge of it, and I have a basic understanding. Some subjects more, Epstein case, etc. But I see these events and patterns exist over in cases like Kendall House in the UK that I studied, where it was a care home where they were basically shipping girls in and out, and it was all for government, people in government to have sex with children and people of influence to have sex with children. And of course, back then they were recording most of the things they were doing, and now they're still doing that. So you're doing a really important job. So let's go back to the Franklin scandal. So is that the basic route? There was who was charged in it? Was anybody charged, just the victims?
Franklin got, I'm sorry, Lawrence King got charged with some, I don't remember the details of the financial crimes. He was let out early, but otherwise he was not charged with anything in regards to crimes against children. Rusty Nelson, who was his photographer, he is still a registered sex offender to this day. I did verify that at least. So he is still registered in the state of Nebraska as a sex offender, and I do, show that in my Franklin series on Instagram. That way people can see it. It is public record, so it is what it is. I think that people have a right to know. And the victims, Nick Bryant has them on his podcast from time to time. But otherwise, I mean, it was just a massive cover up. But
Yeah.
there's too many ties. There's too many ties to where the Satanic Panic kind of picked up in California with McMartin, Aquino. Aquino was technically named
What
by two people in Franklin.
what dates do you see, like, or what rough period have you gone back to in the Satanic Panic on the American side?
As far as when, so here's my opinion, and this is just my opinion, because this is the argument that I'm trying to lay out. So hopefully I can explain this well, because I haven't laid the argument out yet, but it is my strong suspicion. But
You're speaking like a journalist, and I like that.
Oh,
So
thank you.
keep it going.
So I think that the late 80s, very early 90s, there were these rumblings. And in my opinion, because I've read through some government testimony regarding human experimentation on children specifically, and there are old government documentations that state if X, Y, or Z chemical works well, it should be effective for about 20 years. Okay. So I'm going from where that first was noted in the 60s, very early 60s, all the way to the 70s.
Perfect.
If it starts to wear off and these things are coming back, and we have this rise of these satanic groups and individuals like Michael Aquino, and then these cases start popping up, I'm looking at that time frame. So late 80s, very early 90s, because honestly, all the Satanic Panic was, in my opinion, this whole idea that it wasn't real, it was just like a massive PR campaign. That's all.
I would. So I've covered a guy called Horace Dibbin. He's I think he's one of the most important guys in history for the seeding of Satanic Panic narrative. He wrote a selection of articles. I've looked through the newspaper archives And I've tried to understand the Satanic Panic. I looked at all of the stories about Satanism and stuff that existed in British newspapers and some American newspapers, as far back as I go. And it seems to be there's sometime in the mid 50s, late 50s, there's some talk, just a slight talk, and it's like it whips up a little bit of a frenzy in people, and people get into a little bit of a tiz, we would say in Britain. They get into a tiz, they get a little bit
Yeah.
dizzy, and they get all excited about it. It's all very exciting. And I think that got clocked by the intelligence agencies who were forming during that period. So I think it's in 1961 that Horace Dibbin writes as a weekly 4-part weekly series in the Daily Mirror newspaper in the UK. Daily Mirror that would later be owned by Robert Maxwell and others, and is very it's intelligence linked, setting down a narrative paper. It's amazing. Some of the stories in history, it's like the government telling you what to think directly to you once you know that the government at the time were telling you what to think. So you at the time you would have been unaware of it. But he wrote these articles. I've done full read-throughs of them. One's called something like "I Met Satan." I'm gonna have to go in and properly check what these what the titles are for these pieces, because they are quite fantastic. Here we go. I got them right here.
That timing is amazing. I just want
Yeah,
to note
I know.
because that is when we have the first record officially where they're talking about ESP experiments
Mhm.
with kids.
Yeah. Okay.
I
So
think that is they correlate.
Horace Dibbin is basically in between a gangster and intelligence asset. He's like, he was used to be a wing commander or whatever you call it during World War II. He was a tough boy. He claims that while he was in the Orkney Isles, he was serving in the Orkney Isles, doing air raids and protecting Britain, you could say, up in the air. He joined a satanic cult. And the first article he wrote is called Slave of Satan. The second was called My Death Warrant. The third was called I Flee from the Vengeance of Satan's Brotherhood. And the fourth is called I Cursed This Man and He Fell Dead. And Horace Dibbin, if you for people who don't know who he is, he's one of my favorite people in history. There's no one who's more interesting than Horace Dibbin, an antiques dealer who was Plymouth Brethren once upon a time. And as I told you, he was some sort of, flight commander, Plymouth Brethren, really like strict family as well. And he became a very famous antiques dealer, but also used to do renovations of houses for the rich and famous. And through the 50s, he got his first Pygmalion girl. In actual fact, he claims that he had recruited her when she was I think he claims originally 12 years old, but records, and she says she was 16 when he was looking for the Pygmalion girl who was going to come, and he was going to make her into a perfect woman. And he liked kinky sex and selling this woman off to have sex with elites. And her name was Patsy Morgan Dibbin. Eventually, she took his last name when they married. When she took it, he took her under his wing and basically was pimping her all over the place. And she eventually put her in charge of Esmeralda's Barn, a famous nightclub used by spies for dead letter drops, and a famous place for the royals and the rich in society in London, in high class area of London. So it's really like interesting period, and how Hod Dibbin was like heading up these sort of nightclubs during that period. But afterwards, Patsy Morgan Dibbin goes disappearing, and there's rumors of her across in Europe. There's no real evidence. It's just all hearsay, and she just goes vanishing. Another one of the many girls to go vanishing in Hod Dibbin's life. And the next person who took the place, and his next Pygmalion girl, was Mariella Novotny, who was caught in the bedchambers of JFK while she's married to Hod Dibbin, just announced in 1960, 19 just as JFK's won the election, but before the inaugurations happened. Oh God, I can't say that word. Okay, shh, don't tell anybody I can't say that word. Just before he became president of the United States of America, just in between then, he got caught she got caught in bed with JFK and had to be smuggled out secretly by the CIA and FBI, but it didn't work very well because all the press were waiting for him when they got to the shores of Britain, and they were click, 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 click. And it was a big story, of course. And she was friends with Christine Keeler and everybody like that ended up with a perfumer affair with the downfall of the British government, which was another honey trap operation. The initial Tom Corbally, who I mentioned earlier, who's in between Washington and London all of the time, is mixing in all of these circles too. And this is all intelligence stuff. This is all Stephen Ward ends up dying in custody and becoming like the patsy for the whole criminal enterprise. But when Mary Ellen Novotny gets smuggled out, obviously they're thinking, how do we get out of like all of the news being about Mary Ellen Novotny being smuggled out of America? And Hod Dibin writes these articles which seed in Satanic Panic narrative, and they're about how he sold his soul to Satan, and then the Brotherhood was chasing. It's kind of cartoonish, you know. It's like I do when I do the read through, I do all the voices, and some of the stuff is like, "We'll get you in the end, Dibin." they very much sound. He makes them sound like that. They're very cartoonish in the way that, so that it's not like a proper idea of what Satanism is or anything. It's like but at the same time, they were the ones hosting the Man in the Mask parties where all the elites were attending. The Man in the Mask ones that were just like where they were all naked in the aprons, and it's like, I mean, Kubrick and others based scenes on this exact person, Hod Dibin's parties. That's Hod Dibin's. You walk through, there's people having sex. Mary Ellen Novotny's doing sex shows in front of everybody, and there's peacocks walking through the house. You know, this is like the height of sexual compromise operation. At the same time, the exact same person is one of the first people to be publicly seen in Satanic Panic narrative into the wider public. But that would evolve, I think. And so when you're talking about when this is happening, what he does is he lays down something that gets catchy, and then there's many more articles afterwards in the future about Satanism and the risk of satanic stuff taking over the world and stuff. But it really does spark something special. And I'm not saying that Hod Dibin was a Satanist. Hod Dibin used Satanism as a cover for intelligence operations, but Satanism was spicy and attracts people. And soon, I think people got serious with Satanism. You know, they went from being these parties with the Man in a Mask, where it's all kitsch, you know, kitsch.
Right.
It's all tongue in cheek. Everybody's walking around going, we know who
Very
each
posh.
other are. Yeah, but we're all upper class, etc. Well, 10, 20 years on from there, people are trying to repeat the same things. The stories of the Man in the Mask parties have been outed in all of the press in the UK through the late 70s. Mary Ellen Novotny eventually I think it was about 81, eventually gets found dead. She drowned in jelly.
I remember that. I remember reading your series on that.
Yeah, unbelievable. Well, that whole period seems to be like that's when the people who wanted to believe in this sort of underground satanic movement had enough fire put in their bellies to have created a proper satanic movement that was kind of from the days of Aleister Crowley, because it'd obviously been a dip and it all became tongue-in-cheek. So I think what you're doing is studying like the same road with all of these splatters of information and things that happen all over them. And I'm like in a different place in the world, but the same things are basically happening. It's just they're testing things out, and it's a test bed for seeing how people react to this sort of stuff. So when you said now tell us about this then. When you said ESP, is it experimentation? I take it they're talking about.
Yes.
And this is is this MK Ultra
yes.
stuff?
One
and
of its many sub projects.
Yeah, sub project. I now tell us a little bit about this then.
So this sub-project technically was under Bluebird, which was then renamed to Artichoke, and then under the umbrella of MK Ultra. But Bluebird was going on during the time of the OSS before they turned into the CIA. So we don't know what they were doing. They can tell us what they were doing, but we don't know. And, it's not that you have to sit there and dissect the language in these FOIA documents. However, they do note in this one memo from 1961 about this ESP subproject involving children that there's already mountains of evidence from other experiments that they've been conducting. So those are things that people need to pay attention to because it's been going on. And the idea of adding children into it isn't new. That's, I just think, probably a mistake that, they kept it on record and it didn't get tossed away when Richard Helms demanded that Sidney Gottlieb destroy all of the documentation. But I think that the note of G.H. Estabrooks informing Hoover in their many correspondences that if a hypnotic drug or chemical works very well, it'll last 20 years. He's very confident in that. And
Wow.
I just find the timing of that with when these things start coming together, so to speak. I don't.
So just to define, when you're saying hypnotic chemical, I suppose what they mean is something like when you use a chemical in line with a form of hypnosis.
Like a truth serum, whatever they would deem a truth serum. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't trust these people. So they may say that they're giving one thing, most people think of MK Ultra as just like, Timothy Leary and LSD and the Summer of Love. And no, because all of this stuff is included as well.
But basically the chemicals like an aggregator to enter into someone's psychosis, and then hypnosis is the thing that seals in a job on that person.
Lowering the inhibitions. So lowering the inhibitions. Now, hypnosis is a part of it, but specifically with the ESP, it's talking about inflicting serious trauma, repeated, constant trauma. That way, they can facilitate the creation of multiple personalities or dissociative states. So whether you want to call it multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. That's why they talk about, especially with the electroshock therapy, violence, isolation, extreme fear, things like that. And trying to hypnotize, so to speak, some of these other personalities. So it's very interesting. So people think of Manchurian Candidate, right? Like program to kill, basically, right? Like you pick up the phone and they say the word and that's it. But it's just not the case. It's not the case as far as the assassins go. Why were they doing this to children? It's documented on record, severe trauma to split the mind and then hypnotize those other parts of the mind for what, 20 years? Why?
Listen, one day when I tell the tale of my life, I can tell of 4 or 5 moments where people have tried to either change my mind by using drugs, or and one occasion where someone's tried to hypnotize me without me realizing it, or thinking that I'm not realizing it, for ends that I completely like suspicious. And so this is something I think is a technique that people don't realize, is that if you say you go to a counselor, or you go to someone you trust, you go to someone who you think you trust, if that person has gained your trust and is part of an operation, they have got an ability to put you in a position where you slowly will allow them to do more and more and more, and let more and more into your mind, until suddenly there's a moment where things change. Now, this sort of thing you're talking about, is a lot of it is trauma based. you say, so there's probably done quicker and aimed to do to be done quicker. But I think a lot of this was long and drawn out as well, if I'm not wrong.
So, from some victim testimony that I've heard, generally, if okay, so let's just say it was me for argument's sake. One round of severe trauma is not necessarily going to cause my mind to split, but this sustained, repeated over and over again in every single horrific way that one can imagine. And oftentimes these kids are, brought to the brink of death, and then they're revived. So, how much trauma can you take, in the child's mind? Our brains are so beautiful, right? That they have that mechanism to be able to kind of shield. They are naturally wanting to protect the child. And so they're able to kind of split, so to speak, and they create that little shield. But the next time it happens, another split, another split, another split. And that's why some individuals, when they get older and start to understand what happened to them, I mean, there are people that have, over 1,000, 2,000 personalities, and each of them have a name.
Mm-hmm. That's hard for people to understand. Of course, that's hard for people to understand. But the mind is quite a tremendous thing, especially when it's put under a mass amount of trauma and repeated methodical psychological I don't know what the word is. Manipulation. I suppose it's just manipulation.
The psychological, methodical, strategic, all of it. They knew exactly what they were doing. They did not care.
Yeah,
and they still
think
don't.
You mentioned about the OSS and what they were doing back then, and I can promise you it would have been some of the darkest stuff you could possibly imagine. They had the right in war to do terrible, awful things. So when they come out of war, they became terrible, awful people who were ruling everybody. Really, some of the worst people who had done the worst things at the worst time possible for the worst reasons, and that's who we were let. That's what the creation of the New World Order was, from that pool of people, the worst people from the worst time ever. So it's not a surprise that it leads on to this. Right. So, okay. Where were we? We're talking about. Go on.
Well, I'm trying to think. Where were we? Oh, the Satanic Panic.
Yes.
Over
okay.
here.
So over there, when you're talking about an evolved version, like from what I've started researching, because I'm back in the past, I'm like 15, 20 years before, looking at like this starting of them seeding, because there's more than just the Horace Dibbin articles. There's a lot of other things. Do you think it was easier to create these sort of like satanic churches, satanic groups and stuff in America than it was over anywhere else in the world? Do you think that America is weirdly kind of like open for stuff like that?
I think so. I mean, Michael Aquino wrote that book that was kind of, his claim to fame, Extreme Prejudice, about him and his wife Lilith, even though charges were not taken off of his Army record for child abuse. The Army certainly thought that the evidence was sufficient to keep it on his record, even though charges were never filed because people wouldn't cooperate and the statute of limitations expired. But I think if you have a really good PR machine, because I find it curious, and I ask people when I talk about this, don't you think it's a little strange that the False Memory Syndrome Foundation pops up out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, every single news station and newspaper is saying the exact same thing, that there's just a ton of therapists that have, at the snap of a finger, gone rogue? I think that's a little weird. So I think that, just, like you're talking about, I absolutely think it was all an operation, a long running operation.
But isn't it interesting that an operation based around evil and doing evil things, it cloaks itself in true evil? Wasn't it always going to get there where they couldn't go anywhere else? They're so open about what they want to do. So oh God, I mean, This is a question I've had loads of times recently, that recently over the past few years. When I study subjects like this, I keep coming around to thinking, w- with Satanism, how much of it is actually what we think it is today is actually just stuff that was made up recently by people like Aquino and others, and people who are really like probably a part of an operation, and how much of it is actually the stuff they would have practiced back in the day if they ever did practice it once a day. Has it ever been one thing, do you think?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think that there's the people that, want to be the edge lords, so to speak, like what we would call them today. And then I think that there are people who took it very seriously. You have, I mean, L. Ron Hubbard in Scientology and Jack Parsons like practicing black sex magic at one point. So I mean, the things are there, and I think it's a mixture of both, and I think that that's why it's really easy to confuse the general public, because they can't necessarily discern by any fault of their own what's real and what's not. And so the stuff that's not necessarily real or powerful and is more of the whole like edge lord thing, um, it almost makes it a topic that people don't want to talk about, because if they do, or when it's brought up, they might sound silly, quite
You have to,
frankly.
yeah, I was going to say you have to use like a different lexicon, which suddenly
Yeah.
becomes really ridiculous when you're
Yeah.
saying stuff like, grand, I don't know, grand, even when you do with like the Ku Klux Klan and stuff like that, you
Oh, like
start
the
to say,
Grand Wizard.
yeah, you
Yeah.
say grand wizard and you're like, oh God, here we go. It's automatically, it's made to make you feel put off because you have to have a dog in the fight. Again, you have to have a dog in the fight. How much is Satanism, of that sort of brand of modern Satanism, was funded, do you think, by intelligence agencies and programs like this then?
I think, in my personal opinion, and I'm working on laying out the argument, I think that every single every single major cult, because nobody can look me in the face and tell me honestly that any sort of cult that abuses children in this way, and especially those that profit off of that abuse, that they're not practicing the dark arts. I don't care what you want to call it. You want to call it Satanism, Luciferianism, whatever. It's the dark arts. It is the cruelest, most wicked thing that one can do. So,
Mm-hmm.
that being said, let's look at Manson, right? And he had his connections to Scientology as well as the Process Church. Well, then you have the Process Church of the Final Judgment. You have the family. You have the children. There's a strong argument that they were trafficking children. Scientology, right now, the people that are coming after me, well, the ex-Scientologists, supposedly, but Scientology, as we speak, they have a human trafficking case here in Florida, and it's not their first. Okay. So I think that all of these things, you have to have some sort of protection to get away with human trafficking, period,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because these things date back for decades. So,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. These cults are funded by intelligence. Absolutely.
But still, they gravitate to an ancient source of purest form of evil to be able to get away with it eventually, and it seems to work well for them because, well, if you go to a party and you're offered very little party but a decent life, or all party all the time, the people who really want a party will go that way. And that's what we're seeing. A lot of this is party boat stuff. It's been said about intelligence, you get on the party boat and you can't get off, and it's the same with these sort of operations. If you're going to tarnish your name with all of the silly words that come with being a Satanist and doing all of the silly things, and then worse, what you're really doing is lobbying for whatever alternatives are within that framework than what in the current framework. So that would mean do what thou willst, really. It
Yeah,
just,
as above, so below. Yeah,
yeah,
all of
yeah,
that.
all of that sort of stuff, and they've got lots of. I mean, it's a very creative thing because you can say the devil spoke to me, and so you can get. I mean, a lot. It's in a sense, religion's done that to itself because the whole "oh, God spoke to me and he said this," it backfires on you eventually because that can go around in swings and roundabouts. Um, Okay, I'm going to ask you something, and I'm happy to answer this too. But yeah, I don't expect too much of an answer. It might be too personal. But um, do you think there is real satanic, like there is a Satan? Do you think there is a real, like, evil figure somewhere that's not necessarily in a human physical looking form, not that, but a kind of undercurrent of evil that's tapped into by these people? Do you think that
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. 110%.
yeah,
Absolutely. It's very powerful. Like I said, nobody, I don't care what the reason is, whether it's the government experimentation, whether it's these cults, I don't care what it is. Um, Robbing a child's innocence, changing the way that they view the world, and especially if you're doing it from a position of authority within a theological or religious setting, threatening their limited perception of eternity, you know, um, I'm sorry, that's just straight up demonic, in my opinion. And I don't care if people think that I sound crazy. It is what it is. When you really like sit down and, obviously don't think about it too much, but put it into that perspective. What else is the goal? Because I try to explain to people my opinion through my research is that, the impetus or the start of it is generally greed, and it's greed for wealth, right? But then that doesn't cut it. And then it becomes greed for power. And then it becomes greed for total domination and power.
hmm
And this is complete domination and power in that person's eyes.
how many people do you think are likely to hear that calling? Do you think that if this sort of thing become a little like more accepted and more mainstream, kind of like sort of gender ideology sort of pushes limits now, do you think that if this sort of thing could become more mainstream and get a gathering, a certain following, do you think that it would attract a large amount of people? Do you think that something that's inherently evil? Do you think that people are in? I mean, I'm trying to understand people. I'm trying to understand people because I think most people are good, but what I've learned from studying FBI profiling is that situational pedophile idea, that idea that situational pressures put upon someone is the only time they offend, that they don't prefer sexual partners, made me go, situational pressures applying can make people do a whole range of things. Doesn't mean that they're the right things or the wrong things. Sometimes like people just like bite their nails loads because they got situational pressures. Doesn't mean they're going to do the worst thing. But that means that there's a massive amount of people who you could say may not be pedophiles under the wrong situation, but that's got to apply to other crimes. People are more likely to steal under the right situational pressure. People are more likely to kill if the situational pressures are
Sure.
correct. All of these things should apply. So I wonder how many people in that sense are situational Satanists. Like if it was to become mainstream, how many people would just flick across to it as a norm? Because do you think it's just a very small amount of people? And if there's because what we just said, if there's like an energy, some form of evil energy, whether it be a person dressed up and cackling with horns, or whether it just be a constant universal energy that is from something else but manifests like this. If that energy exists, then how many people are subject to it changing their entire lives? do you think?
And harming other people's lives irreparably. Yeah. Um, so I think, people's susceptibility is obviously going to vary as far as what they are susceptible to. Um, do I think that if it was to become very mainstream, it's not that I don't have hope. I wouldn't be doing any of this if I didn't have hope. I do. I do think that people are inherently good for the most part. I think that we are
But led
lied to
astray. But led astray. I mean,
and
even
lied
though,
to.
yeah, yeah. I mean, okay. So imagine if evil was to be genetically modified in any way, shape, or form, and that was written in the text. And then you have gene therapy stuff, which would alter something and would be against those texts. How many people do you think in the world would be would go for that if the situational pressure applied
Yeah.
was enough?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we've seen. And we've seen the majority, over 90% of the world bend over, or at least they say that to us. Most of that is extremely coerced, and some of it isn't even, like Africa. They're not going to talk about it at all.
No,
Or, in
never.
India, they're not going to add those into the stats, leave those out of the stats.
Never.
But a lot of people bend over to situational pressure. You put situational pressure, you can make people do a whole array of things. And if I think that expressions of evil are actually coming out all of the time. And what's the difference between expressions of evil and expressions of Satanism, except one's just like organized around the idea of what that energy or the evil that runs as a current in the background, the potential of evil that runs constantly throughout active life, things that can interact with stuff. I mean, I'm really interested by this because, of course, I think we're entering into something which it looks like end times. I'm not, I have not been in church or within a church since I was 11 years old. I have no like I believe in like universe is kind of like a whole thing of energy, and you're kind of on a wave and you just have to follow what you independently a feeling is necessary path in life, and once you're attuned to that, everything else will work out in the universal supply. Now that means being good to people, being nice, to doing good things, and etc., and it's basically there's no difference between that and living a religious life. So I go around helping people in my community, being nice to people, trying to help people out all of the time, and trying to tell truth all of the time. And that's basically what a religious person. So I feel like I'm akin to religious people. I found now, as the kosh comes down from many different angles, that a lot of people who are religious are the people who are standing next to people like me and saying, you're doing the right thing. And it's the first time in my life where I realized that in a sense I am religious. So are we approaching an end game here? Can you see people? I know you want to be positive and say that people are going to notice what's going on and start talking about the things that you're talking about.
Well, I'm not going to shut up because I do feel like we're kind of about to see a repeat of this whole satanic panic narrative, and I don't know why. And I think that this is why it's been such a red flag for me, where I'm like, I don't care if you guys think I'm a complete sociopath because I'm coming on YouTube every single day and doing like a mini live stream about this because these things are relevant. So, there are people out here, and one where you are, my good sir, that are still feeding this narrative of the false memory syndrome, even though the science has been highly debunked. False Memory Syndrome Foundation is closed.
Really looking forward to speaking about this because this is really interesting stuff.
These people are hailed as heroes, and none of the, whether you want to call it sins, crimes, whatever, even though no charges were brought, all of these things are ignored. And I personally have been dismissed, saying that I'm feeding into a QAnon narrative. and that all of this has been debunked, and I'm a dangerous spreader of misinformation, even though I think I'm pretty anal about showing people my resources. So, why are you guys doing that? And I listened to this really fantastic interview. Let me see if I can pull up her name. I think her name is Dr. Lecter, but
Dr. Hannibal Lecter.
No.
She
She's
had
wonderful.
Did Dr. Hannibal Lecter eat his willy?
It's Lacter. It's Lacter.
Oh,
I'm sorry,
Lacter. Oh, that's okay. Because I thought it would make sense that Hannibal Lecter would eventually get so hungry, eat his own willy, and become a female doctor. That's obvious. I mean, isn't it?
That's hilarious. I'm so sorry, Dr. Lecter. It's Dr. Ellen Lecter.
I apologize to Dr. Lecter, and I apologize also to Dr. Hannibal Lecter. Don't come after me and eat me. Anyway, go on.
So she did this interview, and she has a website, and it's I think it's Stop Ritual Abuse or endritualabuse.org. It's in my YouTube, but this has been her life's work. And the Satanic Church right now is trying to get her credentials, her license taken away, and this just keeps happening. But they have been successful to a point. They are not allowed to use the term mind control in presentations at any of these seminars.
Seriously, how is that written into law then? Have they got also I take it it's within their policy? How oh my God.
It's within the policy.
Yeah, coercion of language is, of course, like
that's where it starts, right?
But it's like it's the personification of evil, and we see it all around us all of the time. So anybody who uses language in such a what feels like a demonic way. So again, I end up, when you were talking earlier about using language like demonic, well, I'm not religious, and I understand better what demonic means as a term, because it means someone is possessed by something which drives them to do evil stuff,
Precisely.
And we know what evil is, and we know what good is. There's only two options. There's no
Correct.
And indifference is not good. So indifference does not sit on the side of good. There's not three options to this. There's two options: there's good or there is bad. So anyway, so false memory, right? Okay. Where do you start with that? How do you start with that? How do you explain to someone what false memory syndrome is?
Well,
I mean, in two ways. You might have to do it in two ways. You might have to say what they say it is and what it actually is, because that's or the other way around.
Well, so I've come across some gold mines lately and some interviews, which is why I think, because these interviews have been within like the past 2 weeks, I'm finding all of these things, the stuff that we're going to talk about. So there's something going on, right? Like, I'm not saying like, but my spidey senses are up, right? They're definitely tingling. So I like to start with showing people just what the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was, because the term false memory syndrome was not in the vernacular prior to this at all. So we got to look at the root, right? Where did it start?
I like this. Take me to the root, Dana. Take me to the root.
Oh, these people drive me nuts. Okay, so False Memory Syndrome Foundation was started by Pamela and Peter Freyd. And Peter was accused by his daughter Jennifer, who still has not recanted to this day. Okay, this was back in 1992 when the foundation was started. She accused him of abusing her very seriously for a long time when she was young. And well, old Miss Pamela, she just could not let the world know what her dear husband did. So she went and she created literally a pedophile charity organization. And in the
I've seen this move over in Britain, I've seen this move over in Britain.
Yeah, exactly. It's there's nothing new under the sun, so to speak. And in the first publication, the first printed article, because it's not in the archive that's very hard to find, but someone found one of the original copies of their first monthly circular, and she notes, Miss Pamela Freyd, how do we know that we're not defending pedophiles? Let me tell you her reasoning. Because we have graying hairlines, we're dressed nicely, we look nice, and we're people that you would want to be friends with. The second reason, a polygraph that they feel that they shouldn't have to take because they know in their heart that they're innocent.
Oh, that hard.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah.
completely insane to me that this was allowed to fly. And so, in all of these really old circulars, you start to see, I think it's like maybe, maybe a year and a half, that's when you start to see all of these psychologists and psychiatrists flocking. There were a couple that were there very early on, but we start to see some spooks get involved, some spooks that were heavily involved with the repatriated prisoners of war from Korea and the brainwashing stuff that they were going on, that they were involved with at the time. So once you see the money and the CIA doctors start to show up, that is when, I mean, from zero to 60. And they note, and it's very interesting because I love reading stuff too. Like I love going really deep and kind of seeing if there's certain areas where something's going on that maybe I should, drive my focus towards. But in every single circular, they keep track of how many, like the family count in every single state. So you get to see the numbers of families, just it goes through the roof. It goes through the roof. And Miss Pamela was very notorious for slandering her daughter, falsely writing as her daughter, and
Something I've
recanting the
seen over
statement.
and something it was seriously, that's serious evil. It's
She
something I've
got a
seen over and
degree.
over again. Yeah, it's a degree in bloody evil.
She
That's
got a
it's
degree that's the same as her daughter so that she could go and try to work with her daughter and get her daughter fired.
Whoa, that is so sick, man. Someone's got to be a sick. Oh, poor girl. I mean, at that point, you've got to realize that someone is trying to destroy themselves and is too much of a coward. So instead, just tries to destroy their own daughter. I mean,
Yeah.
that's basically the process, and it's not a surprise that someone like that would choose someone evil to be with, who would also do terrible things. And I mean, this is a reoccurring theme that you get, is that it's not just men, it's
No.
men backed up by women, and the worst things that happen have like column A and column B working together, men and women working together to target children in loads of different ways, because men can be drawn in for base reasons, women are drawn in for a different type of power, a different type of control, and often as a way to expel their own trauma through projection onto another person.
Absolutely. I make sure to drive home the point that, that's why I'm doing different series on, the women of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, because well-behaved women seldom make history. And these
Mm-hmm.
women need to be talked about because I would argue that women are just as, if not more dangerous, because they're the ones that you don't expect.
They're the
Um,
ones who can actually go to a school, pick up a child, and no one would have any clue until it's too late. They're the ones who could get into all of those areas and not have a slight bit of extra suspicion, because the extra suspicion comes from something like 8 times more likely to commit a violent crime if you're a man, and a lot more likely for that crime to be rape or sexual assault. And women, we just automatically assume they're the ones there to protect. They're protective. But yeah, I've known some really like evil people in my time, and some of them have been women. I think we've all experienced that, and when that's the case, they can get access to children. I mean, if all those stars align, you get someone like Ghislaine Maxwell out of it. If all those stars align, you get someone who can become really powerful amongst the men who are desperate for what that woman can provide. So can you imagine that, or at least the people at home, I'm sure you can imagine, that it's not about just the power over the child that they're abusing or seeing abused or they're selling off, or that's it's the power to the men that have real power, that woman then brings something to the table that none of them can get anywhere else, and that power is like extreme. That's extreme. The men then will reward that woman massively. So if you find the right type of personality in a woman, you will see the worst of what evil can be. And you know, there's a
Absolutely.
lot of people who think that, you know, the crime is much worse if it's a woman. You know, there's a
I
lot of
think
people who
so.
feel like that.
I
Yeah.
absolutely think so because women are, I mean, whatever. Some people may not like it, but I'm sorry. You know, women are naturally born, to an extent at least, with a sort of protective instinct. And, you know, not
Hmm.
necessarily, I won't say a maternal instinct, but I would say a protective one. And just the fact that, you know, Mrs. Freud, I mean, really, she created a charity foundation and got the government involved to absolve her husband in the court of public opinion. And it's completely
That's
insane
extreme.
to me.
Yeah,
It's very extreme.
that's extreme, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, you know she's got a definite dog in the fight when she's doing stuff like that. I mean, that's amazing. And it's something I was explaining to you before we come on. We were having a quick talk about these false memory folk. And I was saying that I had come across them earlier on, because before I went off on a tangent, when I hit the Nicole Youngkerman series for the Epstein case, it was the first time I had entered into the Epstein case, and afterwards my life kind of went crazy, and it's been just like constantly barrel rolling ever since. And before that, I was kind of trotting along happily in Britain, not really focused in on America at all that much, you know. So a lot of these stories that I'm not sure about, like, you know, I've heard them all in bite-sized pieces over and over again, but I've not really understood how it all connects up, though some people have explained bits of it to me. So I understand some of the more complex stuff, but not some of the basic stuff. In Britain, I ended up following a load of these false memory people around, because they were the people who I was investigating before. Like, you know, pedophiles were the people I was investigating before I got involved in the Epstein case anyway, but much more based on the ground, the people who were trying to change the law. One of them was a QC, I think she was QC, a barrister named Barbara Hewson, who was from the Hewson family. I wrote about the Hewson's family long history of contrarianism that goes back all the way to the 1400s, 1471, I think that article goes back to. And then you skip through time and discover that it's about really getting an understanding of where this woman's come from. Barbara Hewson, who said, she's dead now. She died in, I think it was 2021. I kind of feel sorry for her. You know, she was the one who, when I first started watching her, it was because she was on Channel 4 News, and she said that people like Rolf Harris and Jimmy Savile should be seen as innocent, and it's not that bad what they did, and that the age of consent should be reduced. And then she made a load of other arguments in organizations like Spiked News and stuff, which are a bit like, you know, edgy news sort of channels in the UK, and wrote a few articles about the same subject. And it was clear that she obviously had some sort of connection. You don't just say these things. Now, she's been civil rights in many ways, but I mean, civil rights for pedophiles means no civil rights for children. That's it. You
Correct.
know, you
Correct.
yeah. So there's no such thing. You cannot have it.
Nope.
It's an adult. It means they're a criminal. What do we do with people who have committed crimes? We take away parts of their civil rights, and they don't get them back because you cannot be trusted. So
Thank you.
yeah, so it's really that's a really simple thing. The false memory guys really found that was the only place for them to go afterwards. We cannot argue with the evidence in court as it is. We have to change the process to bring in experts who say that your mind must like be thinking false things, and you're only saying false things and you believe them. So you're going into court and you have to objectively disprove a girl who's extremely convincing because she's been through this trauma, or a statement of someone who's extremely convincing because they've been through the trauma. So that could include tears, that can include real noted emotions. The only way to get over that isn't to say, oh, the person didn't do it, because it doesn't look very good to do that. They had to do it a different way, which is, oh, the girl thinks it happened, but it didn't happen. And that's really the basis that I like when I started realizing what they were doing. They weren't just using that argument. They were trying to make it part of like a sort of like area of psychology, criminal
Yeah, they were, and they
psychology.
failed. They failed
Yeah,
completely.
but it was the same thing that I saw, or that people saw in the 70s with the paedophile information exchange, where paedophiles in the UK believed they were about to get civil rights, some form of right to have sex with children, and so started lobbying governments and created this information exchange, and were lobbying different interest groups with people such as Harriet Harman representing them, who wrote about how she'd help them out and stuff. And Harriet Harman is now it was deputy leader of the Labour Party at one point. So that's the type of ilk of people. There was so much. Eventually, parents went mad. Because, like I say, when you investigate, when you go to the police and you go to the schools and stuff, they ignore you because they just don't want. They know there's going to be some. Let's just cover up and hide it. That's the natural way people go. Even the nicest headmistresses and headmasters, once faced with the situational pressure, they become pedophile enablers. So where
I
you
like to call
have
them pedophile sympathizers.
yeah. I'm saying it through terms of a terminology that the FBI would use. They would use preferential pedophiles for people who are naturally attracted to children, situational pedophiles for people who are attracted to children once situational pressure applies, usually for power and etc. To feel power in themselves. That's man, this is a really that situational tag goes across genres. It
It
goes
no, I
across
mean
crimes.
it really does because, so they started in 1992, and I found a really old clip of the first meeting that the False Memory Syndrome Foundation had in 1994. And Pamela Frade is standing up there and she introduces herself, and she just gets a standing ovation. And she's overwhelmed, and she tells people she's very taken aback. And I tell people when I show it, I say, you are watching a room full of criminals who see their savior. That's it.
Hmm.
Because that she announced Johns Hopkins University, which many people have heard of by now, they were the first university that was willing to recognize false memory syndrome. And
Mm.
I think that that's very interesting because Johns Hopkins has been involved in a lot of shady
Oh,
activity.
oh, really? You telling me? I mean, you're telling that to someone who definitely knows that. I've been doing these
Yeah.
relative investigations where I keep going back to different little programs that go on at John Hopkins that scream intelligence, grab the youth, and all of this sort of stuff. Is really
Yeah, that's what I'm
suspicious stuff.
saying. That's when she said
Yeah.
that. I was like, oh, this makes perfect sense that she
Mm.
got the backing of Johns Hopkins, and then you just start to see, these other psychologists, psychiatrists. I found a random little blurb that Alan Dershowitz wrote in one of the circulars. And I'm like, oh, that's cute. So we have a tie to Ghislaine and Epstein right there. Isn't that
Mm-hmm.
fantastic?
And it's really hard one. Dershowitz is such a hard one because I think he's a dirty old man myself. Um, uh, but it's been used. I think there's people who have, and I've written about this. I think there's people who have purposely gone in with false accusations against him so that he can eventually turn around and say, "Look at those false accusations. I'm innocent." So I think there's so much fallacy creation amongst all of these people, the way they get out of their dirty business. I think they're guilty as sin, and the way they get out of doing their dirty stuff is by getting other people to accuse them of stuff that isn't true true, or to you have to get people to believe that someone who's saying something isn't telling the truth, and there's multiple ways of doing it. So either you do it by a fallacy that way, or you do it by implanting the idea that these children aren't having real memories, that they're having some form of fake recollection of events. And you could create that as well, because you could, if you were to look at loads of traumatized children over and over again, eventually you're going to find someone who fits that mold. Sure. And you can study them. And that happened in Britain, I think, on a couple of occasions with the false memory stuff. The reason it was allowed into court in the first place was because there was a couple of girls who had basically, they had cherry-picked certain girls who had certain experiences, so it fitted with what their narrative. But then if you make the whole thing about that, then all of the rest of it suddenly becomes about that narrative. So you saw the same thing happen in America, and I take it that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the current proselytizer of the false memory syndrome is Elizabeth Loftus, who was the professional witness for Ghislaine Maxwell. She was also the professional witness for Ted Bundy, for O.J. Simpson, for Harvey Weinstein. Yeah. Guess who else? Oliver North. I think that's a little weird.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
That's really strange. Isn't
that curious?
Yeah, there's a lot of curious in these. That's especially for the articles I've been looking at recently. I was really tempted to go off and look at all of Oliver North's testimony that he gave when he was giving testimony about involvement in one of the many things he was involved in. Listen. What is going on then with the false memory stuff now? Are they being, like, I take it none of that gets into court anymore. It can't be used as a defense. Or do they still use it as a defense? They still use it as don't tell me they still use it as a defense.
Well, so here's the argument that I'm trying to make. Because, I mean, whatever, Ghislaine wasn't that long ago. Mm-hmm. And Elizabeth Loftus silenced those victims. She's such a girl boss, right? She's out here just raising hell. I despise that woman, and I don't feel bad for saying that. But however, so if you look at all of these board members, and some of them are in publications talking about the advocacy of pedophilia, how there needs to be no laws, this all needs to be legal. Pedophiles shouldn't feel bad, this and that.
People don't think this exists, but I can promise them. I've done so many times. I've been sitting there astounded by like a sentence that someone says, and you show people, and they can't even look at it. They can't even look. They can't, because they know it's one of those moments. It's the they live moment where they have to fight in the alleyway to stop. Yep. Yes, to stop from putting the glasses on. That moment is really emblematic when it comes to some of the sentences these guys say. You could say it to someone, and their rational mind will not leave it in their mind. It will just like go in, and they'll look blank at you, and it'll just leave straight away. Mm-hmm. It's like they just can't handle it. They can't handle it. So you experience that too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's why when I do my streams, I pull it up and make it big enough so I know that people can read it. And I sit there and I read it, and I give pause, and then I say, do you hear the words coming out of my mouth? Do you see this on the screen? Because I realize that I sound completely insane. But this has been going on. None of these people were ever punished, ever. And, these people find themselves in all of these very weird specific cases, whether it's child sexual abuse, child trafficking, human trafficking, mass casualty events, because false memory syndrome has not only been used in regards to sexual crimes, it's also been used at times where maybe someone saw something that they shouldn't have seen, like the Columbine school shooting back in the 90s.
Oh, man. Oh, don't look into the evidence to that, people. Hey, everybody at home, don't look at the evidence into Columbine. It'll shatter your worldview if you're not into any of this, I tell you. If you're not into conspiracy, that and the Boston bombing, you better stay away from that. Don't look at any of the evidence there. Or basically, you just poo yourself straight, just directly there, just poo just comes out, and you shoot off your chair up into space. That's it.
Boston bombing's pretty dark. That one's real dark. So is Columbine. But
I got to say some form of credit there to all of the people. No, really do go look at all of the evidence. Columbine,
Absolutely.
there's one guy who did, I can't remember his name. He did a fantastic look through all of the witness statements and the evidence from Columbine in a fantastic video. It is one of the most, it changed. I mean, I'm already on the wagon. Like I know that there's a whole system out there that does all of these things, and all of these things exist. But even knowing all of this, knowing that people cover up things, mass shootings can be faked, all of these things can be faked, all of the nasty stuff can be operations, that this has happened over and over again throughout recorded history. It's like, these events happen. Still, the Columbine evidence blows my mind away. It's just
It's
amazing.
rough.
And yeah,
Yeah.
people should go listen. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
No,
because you said
you're
that.
okay. No, I want to, I try to be honest with people. It has been used in those events as well. So it's not just
Mhm.
applicable in the area of, sexual abuse or sex trafficking. But as the board members grew old and passed away, I think that it's quite interesting that they were never replaced.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the board just closed down 3.5 years ago. It
Oh,
just
really?
dissolved. Yeah. So I think that that's kind of weird. And then we still have Elizabeth Loftus running around preaching the great truths of the false memory syndrome,
Mhm.
running the circuit. And I have just stumbled across quite a few current day proselytizers of
Mm.
this. So I think
Mm.
that the board members, and this is just my conspiracy, allegedly, whatever legal term I need to say, that the board members were not replaced so that these people could operate maybe under different guises or separately on their own.
Okay. Well, you should be making notes, which I already know you are, but you should be making notes, and we should be swapping notes, and we should be looking into some of these people. I like to get involved in other things. So if you want any help in seeing where any of these people have been, and will be in the future, then we can always do a little bit of that. That's something I like to do. I like to see I like seeing what you're doing in this false memory stuff. I think it's going to resurface again at some point. I think it's going to have less effect each time it resurfaces, until again it's like, the cycle happens again where people have forgotten about it. The memory has been has been lost, and then a new wave of false memory sort of like rhetoric comes up, maybe with slightly different wordings, but we will see it together again, because really I'm going to use the word emblematic of fourth generational warfare, or fifth generational warfare, sorry.
Absolutely.
So it's like the lie, it's the ultimate of the lies, isn't it? You don't know what's real or not, so
Well, and I mean, half of the
stop
science
thinking.
that they use was made by Elizabeth Loftus herself, and that's what she
Mhm.
cites in court. And there are all these junk studies where she thinks that, like, quote unquote, planting the false memory of getting lost in a mall is equivalent to the psychological trauma of what a child goes through with ritual abuse or satanic
Wow.
ritual abuse. Yeah, these are things that are allowed and admissible in court, her as a professional witness, and it's completely unacceptable. And the fact that there are still people within this profession, and I'm going to say it because whatever, within the ex Scientology community specifically, because I've asked these people and they won't, they reply a little bit. One of them has slandered my name. And is also called ritual abuse liars, and say that ritual abuse and satanic ritual abuse doesn't exist, and they're a mental health professional. These people just, hail these individuals as heroes. And unfortunately for them, I don't have a life. So I know the names of all the False Memory Syndrome
No.
Foundation board members. And so when I'm
Mhm.
listening to these podcasts and I'm like, is that the same? Is that the same? And then I go and look and, oh, well, would you look at that? Isn't that
Mhm.
interesting? And quite
Mhm.
frankly, I find it unacceptable. The evidence is out there. People love to say that you got to have evidence, right? You got to bring receipts. I bring the evidence, but they these things have to be addressed because, just like you said, everything comes in cycles, and those cycles tend to shorten themselves over time. And this is trash science. It allowed criminals to walk free. It waged psychological warfare on at least 2 generations of children. And it has to be just, we all have to come to terms with it and move forward. Can't change the past, but we can't let it repeat.
Yeah, but even though we can't let it repeat, we can see it repeating, and we can't stop it for some reason, and we keep trying to put out there. What you were saying about the false memory syndrome, well, it's like it looks like it's broken away and gone undercover a little bit, and it's changed it's looking for its new place. And when I was talking about pedophile information exchange earlier, the same sort of thing has happened. The same people who were representing that still did the same things and lobbied to the same organizations, but they did so independently, all individually scattered around. And a couple of other little groups came up, but nothing was as powerful as that again. So the cycle can be beaten for a certain amount of time, but I see a cycle repeating now in the fact that there's like this obviously a change of what the idea of gender is. And so that causes kids again to be at risk from the exact same people. Who are these people? So this is what my argument is about gender ideology, is that the same people who try and excuse pedophiles for false memory syndrome and everything will soon have to start saying, oh, it's okay that they dress in dresses and going into female changing rooms. That's quite normal. And they'll just be looking to let those people access these areas in a different way, because at the end of the day it is subversive. And there's multiple things I see playing out at the moment that I find pedophiles can jump on the back of lots of different narratives, and we see these cycles repeat. The guy who was, I think, the head of the pedophile information exchange was a guy called Tom O'Carroll, and anybody should go and listen to him speak if you want to understand what an evil person who doesn't understand their evil looks like. Because this is one of the things that we've got, one of the problems we got. A lot of these people who are doing this stuff are truly the most evil and don't realize they're evil. And then there's these other people who realize it and build what really is a church. Like,
pretty much.
You know, whenever you have a society of people, some turn their practice into nothing more than a way they live their life individually, and some turn it into an ideology that's wider, and that includes infrastructures, churches, and other things. And there's already a church available for torturing and abusing young kids. So I think that's what we're seeing.
Absolutely. I would agree, because this ex-cult community, specifically the ex-Scientology community, I think it's real weird that we don't really hear anything about children, yet some of these people state on their pages that they're rescuing kids. I would argue that that's kind of a QAnon sort of vibe. Quite frankly, like, where's the proof? Where's the receipts? I would like to hear from victims. You know, obviously underage, there's some legal concerns there, right? But like, we need to see some fruit of that commentary that you're so boldly claiming after you refuse to acknowledge the things that I've brought up in refutation to your argument. So I think that it's something that deserves a closer eye, because people that are leaving a cult, whether adult or children, they're already vulnerable, right? But then the child is doubly or triply vulnerable. And I think it's interesting, and I showed people in one of my streams that, you know, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation in Britain, when they reached out here to the Fraids recommended them to John Money. He was a massive pedophile. And he was a proselytizer of Alfred Kinsey, who said that babies benefit from, I'm not even going to say it, but you know who I'm talking about. And that's why I keep trying to trace these lines, Johnny, because I want people to understand. We don't have to have a photo of all of these people in the same room to make the argument that they're associated, right? We need to critically think a little bit and we need to just kind of like Charlie from It's Always Sunny with like the red
Yeah.
string smoking the
Yeah.
cigarette, right? But when you lay it out that way, and I've had people reach out to me. I had one guy reach out to me who's been out of a cult for a very long time and is very vocal about it. But there was just something that he felt like he was missing, something that didn't click. And he said once he started looking at my false memory stuff, he goes, it all makes sense now
Mhm.
because it's such a perfect method to use
Yeah,
in
yeah,
cults and
yeah.
also in the ex-cult community. And I care about all victims, so it's
It's
this.
it's it's preparation to deny, isn't it? It's preparation to be able to say that their story's a lie, and that means that's the most evil type of, you're not that shows that people aren't just impulsively committing a crime. They're carefully thinking out a strategy that will get them off the crime, so they know they're criminal, and that means they are in a different level than someone who's just, again, situational. These guys, I would say, are all preferential pedophiles who are looking for a way to enter in to law that what they're doing is legal in some way. And why do you think people do you think there's any why cults? I'm just trying to get, but like, imagine why. I can imagine you're down and you meet someone who thinks it tells you that they can do lots of things, but it still always baffles me why people would follow someone towards being in a cult and enter into cultish behavior. But I
But
suppose
here's
it's
the
all,
thing.
go on.
Scientology is still a church. You know how
Hmm.
much money Scientology has. They
Oh
own
yeah.
an entire city here, literally.
Hmm.
They own it. It's insane. But yeah, and they're global, right? And so is the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Like one of these individuals likes to dismiss it like it was just this random splinter group. And it's like, no, no, they were global too. We don't really
Hmm.
know where they were getting all of their money, which definitely makes me think that they were an op. However, it's not a splinter group. I refuse to separate them from Scientology because they were practicing a lot of the same stuff that L. Ron Hubbard was teaching.
Hmm.
And so they have the backing, but then I'm stumbling across or walking into this community of these ex-cult, but it's a church. It's presented as a church, right? And so it appears to me, personally, allegedly, whatever, that there are certain parties that are operating within the X community that either are covering
Hmm.
and being funded, or they've just started their own thing. Because I think it's very strange that the predecessor to L. Ron Hubbard, because like you, I love looking in the newspaper archives. Like it's so fun because you never know what you're going to find, like little chestnuts. And after L. Ron Hubbard went missing, because people thought that he was dead and they were going to the police and it went to court. His predecessor was a polygamous Mormon,
Mm.
a very prominent polygamous Mormon. And he is like, you can't find him. You don't really hear anything about him.
Hmm.
So L. Ron, dies, right? Disappears, whatever they say happened. Same thing happens to that guy.
Oh,
And then
really?
and then our man that's on the stage now is the
Yeah,
president
yeah.
now. So I see a really weird trend, right? Where we have this enmeshing. I've done a lot of research about the LDS and the Mormon Church before I started with this stuff and their involvement with weird satanic abuse. Um, but now we have Scientology, and then we also have the Mormon Church being tied into this too. And there's a lot of really weird timing with the stuff with the Process Church going to Utah around the same time as there were some very serious claims of satanic ritual abuse going on, which would directly tie Scientology, in my opinion, allegedly, to satanic ritual abuse. Because again, I refuse to separate the Process Church of the Final Judgment from L. Ron Hubbard.
Hmm. I tell you what, I reckon what's happening here is all of these different cults and organizations set up for these different ways to try and tackle this issue on behalf of pedophiles, usually created by pedophiles,
Yeah.
of how to get access to children. All these organizations are discovering that the infrastructure for lobbying and going forward is changing. It's changing around us all. So as things like pedophilia are being more accepted by these people who are creating laws or who are writing the psychiatry books or psychology books, as long as that trend continues, they end up being a part of this what's been hijacked, this LGB sort of like rights train has been hijacked by a load of other letters. Well, that goes off into being a different infrastructure that allows these false memory people to act different under different laws and use different associate with different things so that they can, so the infrastructure is changing. They don't need necessarily false memory and things like that anymore. They need to change their tactics again because the infrastructure they're going to be fighting in has formulated into being something that's much more complicated and higher up than it has ever been before in history. So what we're seeing is a complete change of the infrastructure. That might explain, I personally think that might be explain why what we see actually over and over again, the cycle, the end point and the start of a new cycle is really dependent on the technology of the time and the way people
Sure.
interact at the time. And so in a sense we could say that the internet and this lots of debate online has actually led, and the technology has led to the LGBTQ plus, oh my god, what's that, no, stay away from my children, at the end of it, that sort of thing has only arisen because of that ability to communicate and because of technology itself. So like the
Absolutely.
infrastructure has changed around everybody. Right, well, I've kept you for a long time and we've talked about a lot of stuff, and a lot of that stuff is extremely interesting, and I thank you so much.
Thank you for having me so much.
No, Dana, it's my pleasure. I think we should do things in the future if you're up for it.
Hell yeah, let me know.
Yeah, there's a few things. I got a few ideas and a few plans around the place, but I think there's a couple of things, especially when it comes down to the way you investigate. I wouldn't mind, and I've never had only recently when I did the Pottinger series did I do a joint news hound with somebody, and I'd love to do a joint news hound. So take a subject you know really well, and I'll go back throughout history and see what I can discover from different archives about different people, and then we can you can tell the story of something, and maybe I can present some of the information I found about all of these subjects along the way, and we can do a bit of a joint investigation for people. I'm sure people would enjoy that because it's a very similar thing. I love that sort. I love the fact that you breaking things down for people. I think it's really important. So can you tell people where to find you? And
I would love that. So let me know whenever you'd like.
okay.
And you guys can find me Rotting Jewels on Instagram, YouTube, Rumble, and then on Twitter, it's Dana Duda with an H at the end.
Yeah, Dana Duda with an H on the end. I like Dana Duda. I think it's a good name as well. Right, Dana, thank you very much.
Thank
Real
you.
pleasure.